Good morning. Good morning, everyone. And it's good to see you all here today. So last week, at the end of discussion, towards the end of the hour, Peggy asked, what do we mean by equanimity? And of course, she's been a college professor, so I know she knows the meaning of the word equanimity, but she was asking a deeper question, and I said we could really spend a whole hour on that. So I looked into it a bit more and thought about it some more during this past week. And actually, I don't think we can exhaust the topic in an hour. So I don't promise a complete understanding of equanimity by the end of this time. But let's explore it a bit together. What do we mean by equanimity? Well, we could start with the, the English word equanimity, which comes from Latin, equus, meaning equal or level, and animus, meaning spirit, sort of like even-spiritedness, or what we would ordinarily say, even-temperedness, equanimity. Related words, equipoise, balance, acceptance or serenity, even peace, equanimity, poise. So equanimity is considered a virtue in the Buddhist teachings. It's one of the four Brahma Vihara, divine abodes, along with love or loving kindness, compassion, and sympathetic joy, taking joy in the well-being of or good fortune of others, sympathetic joy. So the words that are translated into English, equanimity, in the Pali Canon is upekha, which comes from the roots meaning to look over or to look upon. To look over or to look upon. And that is a clue as to how equanimity is viewed in this literature. So I'd like to start with a couple readings from the Pali Canon, the early Buddhist teachings. And one of them is called the development of the faculties. These are both from the middle discourses of the Buddha. Then the Brahmin student, Uttara, a student of the Brahmin Parasarya, approached the Buddha and exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversations were over, he sat down on one side. The Buddha said to him, Uttara, does your teacher teach his disciples the development of the faculties? Oh, he does, Mr. Gautama. But how does he teach it? Well, Mr. Gautama, it's when the eye sees the sight, it's no sight, and the ears hear no sound. It's when the eyes see no sight and the ears hear no sound. That's how he teaches his disciples the development of the faculties. Well, in that case, Uttara, a blind person and a deaf person will have developed faculties according to what your teacher says. For a blind person sees no sight with the eye, and a deaf person hears no sound with the ear. When he said this, Uttara sat silently, dismayed, shoulders drooping, downcast, depressed, with nothing to say. Well, knowing this, the Buddha addressed Venerable Ananda. Ananda, the development of the faculties taught by Parasarya is quite different from the supreme development of the faculties in the training of the Noble One, of the Buddha. Ananda replied, now is the time, Blessed One, now is the time. Let the Buddha teach the supreme development of the faculties in the training of the Noble One. The mendicants will listen and remember it. Well then, Ananda, listen and apply your mind well. I will speak. Yes, sir, Ananda replied. And how, Ananda, is there the supreme development of the faculties in the training of the Noble One? When a mendicant sees a sight with their eyes, liking, disliking, and both liking and disliking come up in them. They understand. Liking, disliking, and both liking and dislike have come up in me. That's conditioned, coarse, and dependently originated. But this is peaceful and sublime, namely equanimity. Then the liking, disliking, and both liking and disliking that came up in them cease, and equanimity becomes stabilized. It's like how a person with clear eyes might open their eyes, then shut them, or might shut their eyes, then open them. Such is the speed, the swiftness, the ease with which any liking, disliking, and both liking and disliking at all that came up in this case cease, and equanimity becomes stabilized. In the training of the Noble One, this is called the supreme development of the faculties regarding the sight, known by the eye. And it goes on through the other senses until it comes to mind. Furthermore, when a mendicant knows an idea with their mind, liking, disliking, and both liking and disliking come up in them. They understand liking, disliking, and both liking and disliking have come up in me. That's conditioned, coarse, and dependently originated. But this is peaceful and sublime, namely equanimity. Then the liking, disliking, and both liking and disliking that came up in them cease, and equanimity becomes stabilized. So a second reading is from the longer advice to Rahula, Buddha's son, who became a monk. And in this excerpt, the Buddha says, Rahula, the interior earth element is said to be anything hard, solid, and appropriated that's internal, pertaining to an individual. This includes head, hair, body hair, nails, teeth, skin, flesh, sinews, bones, bone marrow, kidneys, heart, liver, diaphragm, spleen, lungs, intestine, mesentery, undigested food, feces, or anything else hard, solid, and appropriated that's internal, pertaining to an individual. This is called the internal, the interior earth element. The interior earth element and the exterior earth element are just the earth element. This should be truly seen with right understanding like this. This is not mine. I am not this. This is not myself. When you truly see with right understanding, you reject the earth element, detaching the mind from the earth element. Rahula, meditate like the earth. For when you meditate like the earth, pleasant and unpleasant contacts will not occupy your mind. Suppose they were to toss both clean and unclean things on the earth. Unclean things like feces, urine, spit, pus, and blood. The earth isn't horrified, repelled, and disgusted because of this. In the same way, meditate like the earth. For when you meditate like the earth, pleasant and unpleasant contacts will not occupy your mind. And towards the end of this sutta, he says, meditate on love. For when you meditate on love, any ill will be given up. Meditate on compassion. For when you meditate on compassion, any cruelty will be given up. Meditate on rejoicing. For when you meditate on rejoicing, any discontent will be given up. Meditate on equanimity. For when you meditate on equanimity, any repulsion will be given up. Meditate on ugliness. For when you meditate on ugliness, any lust will be given up. Meditate on impermanence. For when you meditate on impermanence, any conceit of I am will be given up. So equanimity clearly here is regarded as a virtue, and the cultivation of equanimity is advocated by the Buddha. And the critical ingredients in that cultivation is awareness, recognizing like and dislike when they arise. A couple things about what equanimity is not. In the first passage I read, it's clear that equanimity is not isolation, not seeing, not hearing, not smelling, not touching. So the Buddha doesn't advocate blocking all of the senses, being completely insensitive. And equanimity is not indifference, not caring. Equanimity is not looking at the world in a way as if you have no interest in it. And equanimity is not sort of a fake serenity. I think perhaps we've all engaged in this at times, or at least we've witnessed others engaging in it, where they're seething with emotion of some sort or another, but acting sort of serene and peaceful on the outside. It's very transparent when people do this. And that's not equanimity. It's also not a blunted emotional life where there are no highs and lows, because highs and lows are inevitable, as the Buddha indicated. It's part of our human experience. It's dukkha. There's sorrow and there's joy. There are what are called the 8 worldly winds. praise and blame, fame and shame, pleasure and sorrow, gain and loss. As the Buddha says in the Dhammapada, all come and go like the wind. To be at peace, stand like a great tree amidst them all. So all of these things are inevitable. And not feeling them is not what equanimity is. One way of looking at it is equanimity is the way of bearing the weight of dukkha, the inevitable ups and downs and twists and turns of human life without being crushed by them. I was reading an article about a pediatric surgeon who worked in a urban area, and he was being interviewed about gunshot wounds. Gunshot wounds among children have become much more common with the proliferation of guns, easy access. There are just more stray bullets going around. Most gunshot wounds in children are accidental. They just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. They're innocent bystanders in some sort of altercation. And excluding suicides, there are now something like 1,700 gunshot fatalities in children and adolescents every year in the United States. And the people who are on the front lines of this would be people who work in ambulances, EMTs, people who work in emergency rooms, nurses' aides, and pediatric surgeons. And this pediatric surgeon was saying he just about had it. He just about couldn't take anymore. Having experienced going out and talking to family about a child that's lost from a gunshot wound, was becoming too crushing for him. So we refer to that as burnout, essentially being crushed by dukkha. And maybe at some point, we all have that limit. I don't know. But the Buddha advocated cultivating equanimity to give us some measure of resilience in what is a difficult life. So in our practice, in Zen practice, Zazen is quintessentially the cultivation of equanimity. It is the cultivation of patience. Sitting still is not always easy. Confronting the mind, actually looking at the workings of the mind, one's thoughts, is not always easy. There may be physical pain involved or mental pain involved. But Zazen is standing like a great tree amidst them all. sitting until the final bell, and bearing up. It's not always difficult. Sometimes it's pleasant. But the Buddha advocates not being carried away by any pleasantness or unpleasantness, but sitting amidst it all. So it's not easy. Today, of course, we're confronted by all of the awful things that are happening all over the world. We aren't even seeing a small portion of it. I mean, we're aware of maybe 2 or 3 wars going on, but it's been estimated that there are at least, conservative estimate, at least 110 wars going on around the planet. Most of them we don't hear about. Most of the atrocities we never hear about. The ones we do hear about just seem overwhelming at times. So what do we do with that? Well, it does involve, I think, recognizing our human limits. We can't resolve over 110 wars that are happening around the planet. We don't have the power to do that. But it also involves not shutting down, to bearing the weight of the dukkha that is inherent in human life and playing our part, doing what we can each day. Equanimity, I think, can also come down to a definition like contentedness, being satisfied with this life, enjoying this life, this brief lifetime that we have, doing the best we can with it. So I think I'll stop there, and with a couple questions. How do you perceive equanimity? And when there is imbalance, lack of equanimity, how do you feel that? How do you notice it? How do you notice it physically? Are there any particular triggers that throw you off balance? And how do you deal with those? And finally, can being equanimous sometimes be irritating to other people who are expecting you to get mad or get excited? So we'll stop there, and we'll go into breakout rooms and rejoin in a few moments. Thank you very much for listening today.